The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the speakers or authors and do not necessarily reflect or represent the views and opinions held by the producers of this broadcast. The material herein is for entertainment purposes only.
Welcome to Scariest Paranormal Radio Podcast. This is Kalila Smith, and I'm welcoming Anthony Quinata. He is a psychic medium, an author, a paranormal researcher, and he owns one of the creepiest dolls on the planet, a doll by the name of Harold that some people believe might even house the devil himself. Welcome, Anthony.
Hi, Kalila. It's nice to hear from you again.
Hey, it's nice to hear from you too. And I want to tell everybody up front, Anthony contacted me a few years back, and I was so terrified of Harold that I backed away. I was scared to even talk about it. I was scared to even mention his name. So it's taken me a long time to come forth and ask questions about Harold again, because I have a great respect for Harold. Harold's got quite a reputation. Anthony, you want to tell everybody a little bit about you and about Harold?
Sure. By the way, I have a private Facebook group, which is comprised, I'd say about 97% of people who have had direct experiences with the doll. And they won't even say the doll's name. I was talking to someone recently, and she described that she actually said, because I just moved recently, she actually said, "Are you taking the DOLL with you?" So you're not the only one who's afraid to say its name.
But, yeah. I mean, you got to be careful how you say it and what you say.
Exactly. Anyway, as you were saying, I'm an author. I've written several books. Wrote one book about the doll and my experiences with the doll up to a certain point. And I've also written a couple of other books. One is called Communications from the Other Side. It's published by ARE, the Association for Research and Enlightenment. The second one that they published was We Are Never Alone, Reassuring Insights from the Other Side. And I also self-published a book entitled Until We Meet Again, which is Insights from the Other Side on Suicide. And again, the book about Harold the Doll. And I'm no longer actively investigating, stories of hauntings and things like that, because I've been so preoccupied and, quite frankly, obsessed with finding out what's going on with the doll. But for several years, I was an active investigator. I was also using my abilities as a medium to determine what was going on. And that's basically how I discovered the doll online on Facebook. I'm sorry, not Facebook, eBay.
So you got the doll on eBay?
I did.
Wow.
I did. It was my dream back then just to write a book. I didn't know what kind of a book I wanted to write. And I'd already written a couple of I wrote a book once called If I Were God, and I subtitled it, And You'd Better Thank Your Soul I'm Not. And it was just a book about my personal theology, kind of like if I were God, I'd turn bullets into butter, and I turn, knives into, something that flexes and won't hurt somebody. And at the end of it, it was just like, but then where's the free will? Which to me is
Right.
what my belief in God is all about.
Right.
I also wrote a book about how I lost 100 pounds called Change Your Mind, Lose Your Behind. And
really?
Yes.
Maybe I need to read that. Wow.
But I wanted to write a real book in my mind. And so I was online, and somebody posted something that said, "Can you help me with this?" And it showed a picture of several people who she said were nurses, and it was taken Halloween night of that year. And if I remember correctly, it was 2003. And and I literally wrote her back and I said, that's easy. Somebody photobombed your picture. I do it all the time at airports. And she said, well, what you think is a hallway behind us is actually a small office. So I asked her to send me pictures of that. And I was so intrigued that I flew out to California from Denver to talk to her and her employees. And she told me it was fine as long as I kept things, quiet, because she had already been threatened with her job because she couldn't stop talking about it. And the photo she posted showed 5 nurses, and because they all worked in a psych ward, they were not allowed to wear a mask. They could wear costumes, but not a mask. And in one of the pictures, there was a man standing behind one of the nurses, and it looked like he was wearing a mask from the creature from that looked like the creature from the Black Lagoon. And
wow.
so that's what I was responding to. Like I said, I flew out, and unfortunately, nobody was willing to talk to me except for one guy named Tony, of all things. And he asked me if I thought that the face had anything to do with the medallion he was wearing, because he had borrowed it from a friend of his who was an antiques dealer, and she had bought something in the early, I think it was 1962, and she believed it was from the 1930s. And I said, I've heard about things like that, but I've never really investigated it before. So I asked if I could buy the necklace, and he contacted the person he borrowed it from, and she said, yeah. So, we negotiated a deal, and I went back to Denver with it. And during the next meeting of my group at the time, the Colorado Rocky Mountain Alliance for Paranormal Activity, we were meeting for dinner, and I happened to mention that I bought this thing, and somebody said, has anybody seen the haunted clock for sale on eBay? And I said, they sell haunted items on eBay? She's like, sure. And I'd bought things like collectible coins or collectible sports cards and stuff like that, but I didn't know they were selling haunted items. So I went on, and I was and still am a skeptic at heart, open-minded but a skeptic. And I saw a lot of these things, and I was just like, what a load. Anyway, all of a sudden I had this great idea to write a book, and I was going to call it Haunted eBay. Are you going to believe me or your lying eyes? And I was just going to, buy objects. Like I was going to buy a toy that was supposedly haunted. I was going to buy a clock. I was going to buy a painting, just a number of different things. And I was going to run through a series of tests, quote, in quote, tests, EMF meters and cameras and all that other good stuff. And then finally, last but not least, I would submit it to a psychic that I knew and trusted, and see if the story they gave me matched the story that was listed with the item. And I just missed, well, I didn't just miss, I actually was watching the Dybbuk box that Jason Haxton had up for sale. And I thought, I'm going to get in there at the last minute and see if I can go ahead and bid on this thing. And the last 2 or 3 minutes, and I was complaining to Jason later on, he's the one who bought the Dybbuk box that now sits in Zach Bagan's museum in Las Vegas. And he said, a number of people said they weren't allowed to get on in the last couple of minutes. So anyway, I was just going to see if I could get it, and that was going to be my last purchase. And for some unknown, ungodly reason, I kept looking on Facebook, and I saw a listing it was a second listing for Harold the Haunted Doll. What was Harold? eBay's most infamous haunted doll, Harold the Doll. And again, it was the second listing. It had sold a year before. And I looked at the listing and literally laughed out loud. I thought, this is the most ridiculous listing I've ever seen in my life. I can't believe anybody would buy this. And the person who listed it second, her name was Kathy. She mentioned that it was talked about on websites. It was talked about on Art Bell's Coast to Coast broadcast. And I was just like, what a load. And, I bid on it. The reason why I bid on it was because it had a reserve. And, it could have been negligee, hooker heels, and a tiara, and I would have bid on it if it had a reserve, because I just had this thing. I had to know what the reserve was. And so I bid $300 and triggered the reserve, which was $295, which stunned me. And I immediately thought, the moment somebody outbids me, I'm out of here. And as soon as I thought that, I received an email from Kathy in Dublin, Ireland, asking me why I wanted the doll. And I explained to her, what I had been doing. And she wrote back, I don't believe the doll is haunted. I do believe it's cursed, though. Well, I thought that was intriguing. But more than that, a guy who called himself, I'm assuming it was a guy who called himself Strange Magic, Majik, wrote to me and said, don't bother bidding on the doll. It's mine. If you do outbid me, I'll just keep outbidding you. Well, Kalila, I had and still have this huge, massive testosterone problem. And I thought to myself, you may win this thing, but it's going to cost you in the end. So every time he bid, I just outbid him. And my thought was, in the end, I'll throw some incredibly high price. He'll win it. He'll end up with this incredibly ugly doll. And that'll be the end of it. But in the meantime, Kathy and I kept talking, and she was telling me some of her experiences with it, which, again, I didn't believe. I didn't think she was lying, but I didn't necessarily believe them. And I think it was in the last 2 or 3 minutes of the auction, Strange Magic stopped bidding.
Oh, wow.
And I was just like, no, you have to outbid me. You promised me you would. And all of a sudden it said, congratulations, you won. And I thought, oh, great. I just spent $720 on the world's ugliest doll. And Kathy immediely wrote to me and said, look, I know you didn't want the doll. I know that you got into a bidding war with Magic. And, don't pay me for it. And I'll just write down that, you're a non-paying bidder. And I wrote back, I said, look, a deal's a deal. I'll send you $720. You send me the doll. And she said, well, if you do, I'm going to wait for 2 weeks and I'll ask you again if you still want the doll. If you do, you can send me the money and I'll just give half of it to a children's hospital. I can't remember where the other half went, but, she said, I'm not going to keep the money. And 2 weeks later, I wrote her and I said, here's the money, send me the doll. And she sent me the doll. And on the day she sent me the doll, I actually Googled this to make sure that it was legit. She said she watched them take the package and put it in the back wherever they put it. And she was driving home, and not 10 minutes later, the Irish postal system went on strike. And that just literally totally wigged her out. She said, I should have thrown that damn doll into the ocean. And a couple of weeks later, I was standing at my front door getting ready to go somewhere when my mailman pulled up. His name was Greg. And he's like, good morning, Anthony. I said, good morning, Greg. He says, hang on, I've got a monster for you. Literally, word for word, I have a monster for you. And so I walked down thinking, I'd bought so many things that it had to be some huge package or something. And I looked into the back of his little station wagon, didn't see anything, but I did see a return address marked Dublin, Ireland. And I thought, well, Harold's here. And that literally, my life hasn't been the same since.
Wow. Wow. Oh, wow. What a story. And that's just the beginning of the story, too.
That is. It's just the beginning of the story.
Wow. That is amazing.
Stay tuned for more Scariest Paranormal Radio.
Submitted for your approval. New Orleans. Seductive, magical, mysterious, and haunted. There is no place on this earth with as much ghost and vampire activity as New Orleans. Imagine, if you will, a tour that takes you to sites in the French Quarter of actual documented hauntings. The Haunted History Tour is just that tour. Every day, every night, all year round. This tour has been featured on ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN. And it's available to you. Are there ghosts and vampires in the French Quarter? Find out by taking the tour that everyone is talking about, the Haunted History Tour. For more information, call Haunted History Tours at 861-2727. That's 861-2727. This is not a Halloween spook house. This is real.
You're listening to Scariest Paranormal Radio.
So at what point did Kathy give you a whole lot of insight as to what was really going on with this doll, like to how intense because I don't know if a lot of people realize how intense this doll is. I mean, I got a little taste of it a few years ago when you and I were just kind of talking about doing some sort of a show with it. And, I freaked out, folks, after I tripped over my own shoe and fell.
I remember that.
And blamed it on the doll. But, it was funny because, you and I were talking about possibly you coming here and my filming the doll. And I said, no, I don't want to be in the same room with the doll. And then I walked outside and I tripped and I thought, I figured, oh, silly me, I had on flip-flops. But then you suggested, you said maybe it was a doll. And then I started thinking about what if it was? Because you've had other people that have had the same situation, didn't you?
Oh, absolutely. To answer your original question, and I'll answer the second part of your question. One of the things Kathy said was that, again, the doll was sold in New York. She was in Dublin, Ireland, but she was going to be in New York. And interestingly enough, she knew the guy who was selling it. She knew they were childhood friends. And he was trying to raise money to go to film school. And that's why she bid on the doll. And anyway, so she went to New York to pick the doll up because her aunt was engaged to be married and was getting married a couple of days after she arrived. And so she flies into New York with Rick, her then fiance, now her husband. And she picks up the doll and she brought the doll with her to the wedding party for the rehearsal dinner or whatnot beforehand. And she showed it to her aunt. And, her aunt commented, as well as a couple of her cousins commented as to, what kind of what an ugly doll it is. And it is an ugly looking doll. It really is. And she got on her computer to do something and she literally fell to the floor screaming in pain. And when she was able to get up and she went to see her aunt at the exact same time she was in pain also had something going on with her back. Her aunt's fiance had something going on with his back, and her two cousins had something going on with their back. So they all went to the chiropractor. And the next day, the aunt's fiance literally had to take his wedding vows in a wheelchair because he still couldn't walk.
Oh my gosh.
Then after that, she was going to go to Jamaica or someplace like that. And somebody she was talking to on a Ouija board. It was called Ouija boards. It was a website. And, they were asking her about the doll. And somebody said, well, if you're going down to Jamaica, you're going to be passing through the Bermuda Triangle. Wouldn't it be fun to take the doll and see what happens? And she thought, yeah, okay. So she brought the doll. She saw the doll go into the ship, got on board the ship, and never saw her luggage again until 2 hours before they got back to New York a week later. And apparently it had been in somebody's in the cabin of four guys who kept trying to call and say, we have this doll or we have these bags, and it wasn't returned to her. So she had to go through the entire cruise without a change of clothes, without her formal wear. She couldn't attend the captain's dinner. She couldn't attend any of the dances, yada, yada, yada.
Oh,
And
God.
she started thinking, I wonder if the doll had anything to do with it. Well, she decided to not bring the doll with her on the plane. She actually mailed it back to Dublin, Ireland. And while she was there, her fiance, his boss and his boss's wife came to visit him one day because they were going from Dublin to Amsterdam the next day, and the guy's wife was apparently a collector of dolls and asked to see Harold. And so Kathy showed Harold to this woman. She was keeping it in a shed. She was that afraid of it already. And the woman said, "Well, quite the ugly doll, isn't it?" And they laughed, and she put it into the closet. Rather than returning it to the shed, she put it into a closet that was in their flat. And I think it was 2 days later, the next day, 2 days later, the woman apparently was going to go downstairs to smoke a cigarette, slipped on some ice, hit her head all the way down, and died of brain injuries that next day. And so, again, Kathy thought, crazy coincidence kind of thing. But they had an employee who was from Wales, and the guy's wife wanted, announced he was going to return back to South Africa, where he was from, because his wife just died. And so Kathy and Rick offered the employee a place to stay with them until, he got back on his feet again. And this guy was from Wales, and apparently, he was like a vegan. He drank, purified water and ran, trained for marathons and all this other good stuff. So he went back to Wales, got a physical, and they declared him to be, in excellent shape. He stayed at their house or at their flat in the same room that the doll was sitting in. And 3 or 4 months later, he started complaining of a tickle in his throat. In his throat. And he went back to Wales to get to find out what was going on. And he was diagnosed as having stage 4 larynx cancer.
Oh my gosh.
And he literally died. I think it was like the same week, if I remember correctly, that I received the doll. And, of course, the doctors were like, "Well, we don't understand. You were just here 4 months ago. Now you have stage 4 larynx cancer. How the hell does that happen?" Well, by that time, Kathy, was freaked out and didn't want the doll anymore. Her fiance didn't want the doll. She put it up for sale on eBay, asking for the same money that she had paid for it. And, there wasn't my happy little hands. And, but to go back, when I suggested to you it might be the doll, it wasn't, it was based on a number of instances. For instance, I was trying to learn how to do the tarot on the doll. And because I couldn't find anybody. I'd bring the doll to these psychic fairs and I'd say, would you do a tarot reading on a doll? They'd be like, "Sure, let's see the doll." And I'd open it up. They're like, "No, won't do it." So eventually I bought a deck of my own and a couple of card books on tarot cards. And I was sitting at my table one day and I was trying to do a reading on it. I didn't know if it was actually possible or not, but I got a phone call from a friend of mine named Angie. And, she said, I was thinking we could have lunch together. I said, "Sure. How long will you be?" She said, 30 minutes. Well, that's Angie time. And actually, she didn't show up for another hour and a half. By that time, I was so exhausted being in front of the doll, I literally laid down and took a nap. And while I was sleeping, I hear her screaming my name, just, bloody murder kind of thing. I went running out and she was literally plastered against the wall next to my front door. And she pointed at the dining table, which you couldn't see. And she said, "Is that Harold?" And I'm thinking, well, how the hell do you know about Harold? And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, honey." And I put it away. And I went and she was like sobbing terribly. And I said, "Are you okay?" And she said that when she drove up, she got out of the car and had this terrible feeling like she was in danger. And she kind of shrugged it off, came, knocked on the door, no answer. And my house at that time, you don't answer, you want to come in, you just let yourself in. So she let herself in, was calling my name, saw the doll, and had this immediate feeling that her children were in danger. Tried to run out the front door, and she swore to me it felt like somebody was standing in front of her, holding her in, keeping her from leaving. And that's how she ended up against the wall. What's interesting is I've since found out I not only know the real identity of Harold when he was alive, I also believe that, that he was a pedophile when he was alive as well.
Really? Now,
Yes.
how did you find out who he was?
I go through the entire process in the book I wrote entitled Harold the Doll, which is available from Amazon. But there were, as you know, I think the last time we talked, Zach Bagans and Aaron Goodwin asked if they could take the doll down to Mexico City
Right.
to
Right.
take it to the island of the dolls. And I contact you. I called you. It's like, do you know these guys? Are they legit? Will they disrespect the doll? Because I was genuinely worried for them because of all the experiences I'd had. And I told these guys, it's like, if you're going to take the doll and make fun of it, I can't send it to you because, something's going to happen and it won't be good. And you said that, from what you knew, they had a great reputation. And they assured me, no, we'll respect the doll. And so, I ended up sending it to them. But it was like right after I sent it to them, and there were incidents that happened before that. Right after I sent it to them, I had people contacting me from around literally the country because that's all it had aired at the time. Now I've had people contact me from around the world telling me, crazy things that happened to them after watching the show. But before all that happened, a woman who in Australia um, offered to help me research composition dolls, and I accepted her offer. And uh, one night she was on the computer, and her husband came up to her and said, why don't you jump off the computer, come on outside into the garage and have a smoke with me? So she did, and they were standing there. And the way she described it was there were lights on the other side of the garage that were facing them. And they saw a shadow of a huge man standing on the other side of the car. And it wasn't like it wasn't like the lights were behind them shining on the other side. The lights are shining in their face, and they could still see this guy standing on the other side of the car. And she said to her husband, "Do you see that?" And he says, "Yes." And he pulled out his phone. And as soon as he pulled out his phone, it darted to the left. And so he followed it, took a picture, and screamed. And she said, "What's wrong?" He says, "It feels like somebody's pulling out my left arm." And anyway, I mentioned that because if you look at pictures of the doll, his left arm is hanging. And so I told Zach and I told Aaron about this. And I said, you really need to be careful because this sort of thing has happened before. Well, shortly after that, she sent me a sketch she'd made, like a little hand drawing of the doll. And she said, do you like this? And I said, I do. She said, would you like it? I said, sure. That'd be $70 Australian. And I literally just laughed, right? And I'm like, really? I own the doll. Why would I want a sketch, and pay $70 for it? Well, I was telling my friend Melanie about it. Melanie does a lot of work with paper. And, and she said, well, would you like me to make a sketch for you? And I said, sure. How much is it going to cost me? She said, nothing. And so I said, okay. Well, she sat down to draw a sketch of the doll, and she couldn't draw the actual doll. What she drew was a demon standing behind three kids. and a black figure that she figured was Harold in front of all of this. And it was just something she saw as she was drawing it. And she told me about it. And she said, I'll tell you what, I'll send it to you after the holidays. So after the Christmas holidays that year, I think this was 2015, she sat down to put the sketch into a manila envelope, and she had another vision, and that's the vision that I sent to you that you said you didn't understand it.
Right, yeah. And I remember you, now that you're talking about it, yeah, I remember you telling me about this before, yeah.
Right, yeah. So again, it was a demon standing with his arms around what looked to her like a cage that had 3 children in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then there was a black figure that apparently was shackled to the cage. And
right.
She was telling me later that she got the feeling that the black figure was Harold and would do whatever the quote demon demanded of him, but he always had to come back to the cage. He could never, actually leave that cage because he was bound to that cage. Then there was a guy in Baltimore who, once he saw the episode that had Harold the doll, became literally obsessed with Harold and was thinking, I wish there was some way I could help Anthony. And anyway, he was an insomniac, and one night he was laying down in bed, and his 3-year-old son was laying between him and his wife, and he closed his eyes and saw a man with a horribly burned face. He opened his eyes and the man was gone. He closed them again, and this time the man was still standing in front of him, snarling or sneering, as he put it. And behind him was a young lady looking terrified. Her hair was just all akimbo, and she looked really terrified. And he opened his eyes and closed them again, and this time he saw what he thought was a young boy, and he could see 2 male presences behind them, but he couldn't see, he couldn't make out what they looked like. And he started praying, and eventually the vision went away. Well, he actually had a friend of his who was a professional sketch artist draw what he saw, and he sent it to me. And I had an incredible researcher named Donna who was helping me figure things out. And she was showing me a number of different pictures. And I don't remember how she found those pictures, but I looked at one of them, and literally in my mind, I said, I got you, you son of a bitch. I know who you are. And we did research, and he had died in a fire during World War II. And, just kept putting pieces together. Found out that at one point he lived in Colorado, and he had 2 nieces that looked just like the 2 young ladies that Larry saw in his vision. And, one thing led to another. And now I know who the 3 people were who Melanie saw in her vision, where she saw 3 kids behind bars. So I believe that they're now reincarnated souls from that whole thing.
Yeah, and you're getting validation every step of the way. Every time you get something, it sounds like you're getting validation following it up.
I am.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
That's what's important to me. I mean, people talk about other haunted dolls, and I'm just really skeptical because in my book, I think there's like 22, 23 plus pages of evidence that I present to say, this is my proof. You don't have to believe me, but, another guy I'll tell you one last story. There was a friend of mine in the UK, and he found out from a girl in Tasmania about the doll, and he was looking for YouTube subjects, paranormal subjects. He wanted to do YouTube videos about them. And she said, well, why don't you talk to Anthony? He has Harold the doll. And Simon said, well, who's Harold the doll? And she said, she told him a little bit about her own personal experiences in Tasmania after finding out about the doll. She told him, if you decide to get involved, something's going to happen. And so he contacted me, asked me if he could do a video on the doll, and I gave him my permission. And, all kinds of crazy things started happening to his home. I mean, to his 2 kids and to his wife and to himself in the UK.
Wow. See, that's scary. That's scary. That's why I didn't want to film Harold. I was kind of scared of that. That kind of, I believe in that. I know it's true, and it's frightening.
Well, it is, to be honest with you. It's very frightening. I mean, I have the doll, and it still scares the living daylights out of me.
Well, that was going to be my next question is, how do you protect yourself from the doll, and what was your scariest moment with the doll? I mean, at what point did you realize, oh my God, this is real and I could be in danger?
I use prayer and meditation. I'm a Roman Catholic, so, I pray the rosary, and, I use meditation. And to answer your second question, there are actually 2 things that happened. The first thing that happened that convinced me something truly was going on with the doll. I was going to fly from Denver to Long Beach, California, to meet with, oh my gosh, he was a famous psychic. He passed away. And anyway, he agreed to meet with me. I think he lived in North Hollywood at the time. And tell me what his impressions of the doll were. And so I took the doll out of storage, and the storage unit I had him in, literally, there was a door that had a lock on it. So you had to unlock the door. Then you go in, and it was a walk-in closet that had several shelves built into it. And then you had to unlock, one of the shelves in order to get whatever was inside of that. These are things I was collecting from eBay, which I was convinced had something to them. And Harold happened to be one of them. So I took Harold out of the walk-in closet, set him down on the living room floor, and started, looking around, just doing a double check to make sure I didn't forget anything. And there was a book written by Kathleen Ramsland. Have you ever heard of her?
Oh yeah, I know her. I know her personally.
Oh, you do?
I'm very familiar.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with her.
You told me that. I think you told me that once before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, she wrote a book called Ghost, and in that book,
I'm in that book with her.
That's right.
I was with her with some of the experiments that she did. Yeah.
Is your picture in the book, in the original hardcover?
I'm not sure.
Because I remember seeing a picture, and I thought it was you, and I don't remember.
It may have been because she stayed at my house while she was writing it part of the time.
Oh wow!
Yeah. She came to New Orleans, and we had a whole big adventure, and we went to seances, and she had all kind of weird stuff happen at my house. And I was a big part in that book, so I could have had a picture in there.
Huh. Well, she wrote about how she was in her home or in her apartment, wherever she lives, and she was trying to find something in her purse, and she literally took her purse, dumped everything onto the coffee table, including all the change that was in it. And then she heard a noise or something. She turned around and then turned back around, and all the coins were now stacked one on top of each other. She said she's not going to stack coins.
Right.
Well, I kept thinking about that story for some reason. And I looked it up and saw it. And it's like, okay. And then I noticed the time. And I thought, well, I really got to get out of here. And I remember it was raining that day. And I got up, went into the master bedroom, and, again, just did one final scan when I noticed literally dimes, nickels, quarters, and pennies stacked on their edges. Okay. Wow. I mean, not stacked like you would traditionally stack coins, but they're all on their edges. And I remember walking up to it, and this was long before cell phones, or at least long before I had a cell phone. And I remember thinking, I wonder how my goofy friends did this, because I literally thought, it was a prank. And they're all at an angle. They're not only stacked, but they're all at an angle, and they're in no particular order. And I remember staring at it, and I was thinking, well, there is condensation outside. Maybe that's what's holding the coins together, or maybe somebody took some molasses and, stuck the coins together in an effort to freak me out. And I reached up and touched them, thinking they would all just, roll over in one big clump. And they all scattered. And the moment they scattered, I could feel a woman standing behind me. And I turned around to see who was in my home because, at that moment I thought I was, I'm alone. Who's in here with me? I turned around, and instead of seeing a woman, I literally saw an airplane in mid-flight exploding and falling to the ground. And as soon as that vision vanished, I'm standing there looking at it happening in front of me. There's Harold in the middle of the damn living room. And I said, okay, buddy, you win. You're not going to see this guy. And I put it away. And at that moment, I thought, well, shit, there must really be something going on here. I mean, to me, that's what convinced me something was going on. Now, fast forward to 2015, I have to just say that at that time, I not only was a Roman Catholic, but I had also accepted the belief of many priests at the time that demons, quote unquote, weren't real. It was, something used to explain, things that happened in Jesus's time in the Middle Ages and such, but they really didn't exist. If anything, it's the dark side of our personality. And at that point, I was helping a family in Australia, which is what the bulk of my book about the doll is about. It was a young boy whom I call Vincent, who accidentally saw the doll on his mother's tablet and started having crazy experiences after that. One of the things I include in my book is a painting, which I have now in my home, that he painted. And the art therapist, and he was 5 at the time, the art therapist said, what did you just draw? And he says, it's what that thing in my mummy's iPad wants. And when he saw the picture of the doll, it was a YouTube video. He told his mom that he said the babies want to come out to the sunlight, but the black thing won't let it. And she was like, what are you talking about? Well, according to his mom then and now, his level of autism doesn't allow him to have an imagination. If he says he sees something, it's because he sees it. He's not making it up.
Okay.
And so she said, I thought you might want to know. And I said, please keep me informed. Well, one thing led to another. He literally was having like episodes where his voice would change and he would start cursing at his mother using words that they didn't use in the house. Another time he scaled a fence, which was several feet high, and started running into a field. Of course, he had everybody chasing after him, but he saw something that literally terrified him. Anyway, he got to the point that I was able to, through Vincent's mom, get a couple of Catholic priests to come out. Now, they weren't Catholic. I don't even know that they're Christian, to be honest with you. I like to joke that if I put a $100 Australian bill in the middle of their Bible and said, call me when you find this, 20 years later, it'll still be safe. The only difference is that they would have collected any interest on it if they would have put it in the bank. But because of everything that was going on, she was willing to listen to me. And she did get a Catholic priest to come out, and he blessed the entire home. And at the time he did that, I decided to do a, quote, ritual sealing on the doll. And I did, and everything was really quiet for the next 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden, Vincent just started going bananas again and started talking about the thing that was in his bedroom that wouldn't let him sleep in his bedroom. And I have a picture of what he drew in my book. But I call her Jane in my book. I told Jane, I said, call your priest friend again and tell him what's going on, that, the blessing isn't working anymore. And I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to use these exact words. Tell him that I believe that Vincent is the object of a diabolical oppression. So she did, and he said he would be by the next day. He came by with another priest who was a bit older, and she thought he might have been a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And they came by the house, and they were coming by the house at approximately 9:00 p.m. Denver time. So I thought, well, I'm going to go ahead and make a YouTube video describing that the priests are showing up. And I started to, shoot the video. I mean, just, I'd hold it up kind of thing and narrate it. And after about 4 takes, I kept thinking something's wrong. And it hit me. I had a St. Michael statue I'd bought 2 weeks before in front of the doll. And I thought, oh, I know. I'll introduce the St. Michael statue halfway through my narration of what's going on in Australia. So I took the statue, which was quite heavy, quite expensive, to be honest with you, quite heavy, probably 2-3 pounds, and I was staying in a hotel at the time. So I put it at the headboard, in front of the headboard. I actually put it on the headboard, and I thought, well, I don't want to do that. It might fall and break. So I put it on the bed in front of the headboard, a good 18, 20 inches in from the edge of the bed, and started recording. And the YouTube video is still up as far as I'm concerned. I've never taken it down. And you hear a sound, and I looked, and I've heard guys, who do these videos and they're cursing every other, they're dropping F-bombs every other word. And I never thought that was very professional. So I wasn't dropping any F-bombs, but I was in my mind going, what the kind of thing? Because when I looked, the statue was now in between the nightstand and my mattress, upside down. And when I leaned over,
chill. Did you?
Oh my God! I'm telling you, it was crazy. When I bent over to look, one of the wings was broken off.
Oh wow!
And I picked it up and I said something, about this happening on the video. And later on that night, apparently, at the exact time that was happening, they were pulling up to the house. And I was thinking about it later on that night, and I thought, oh my God, I've been wrong about the existence of, quote, demons. I didn't believe they existed, but if I wasn't videotaping this, that statue could have easily hit me in the head, killed me, but then it'd be game over, for whatever demon's behind it. And so I took it, really wrapped it in a towel, put it in the bathroom sink, closed that door, and slept with one eye open the entire night. But that would probably, between those two things, those would be the scariest thing, because it was at that moment I began changing my theology about the existence of demons.
Definitely. That would make me change my mind. And I mean, I got to be honest with you. Some of those things, it's like, I don't know. I don't know if I'd be as brave as you are to want to deal with him. I mean, somehow you have developed a rapport with him, and you still have him. So obviously he approves of you and he likes you.
Oh, no, he hates me.
Oh, he does. He
does.
He hates you.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. How do you know this? Oh, my gosh.
It's almost like, how do I not know this kind of thing?
And why do you keep him? What makes you keep Harold if Harold hates you? And I mean, aren't you afraid of him?
Yes, to be very honest with you. But
I'd be terrified. I would be terrified of him.
Well, Bagans asked me if he could buy the doll 3 times, 3 different times. And my answer was the same. It's just like, You're going to put him in your museum? Really? As dangerous as this doll is? Who knows what havoc it can wreak, once that happens. It's just, honestly, I was in Massachusetts. I won't say the town, but I went to go talk to a priest and talk to him about this whole thing. It was kind of funny because he was a young guy. I think he was, pretty much in his first year of the priesthood. And, as I'm trying to tell him the story about what had happened up until that point, the look in his eyes where it's kind of like, oh my God, why are you wasting my time with this? And so I started showing him all the evidence I'd collected up until that point. And you could see literally the blood leave his face and, the fear enter into his eyes as he began to realize this guy's serious. This guy isn't, weaving a tale. And most of the evidence I showed him is in, again, the book. And I'm only saying that it's like, don't believe me, read the book and judge for yourself kind of thing.
Well, we're just about out of time, so why don't you tell everybody again how to get the book? Because I'm sure they're going to, if they don't have the book already, I'm sure they're going to want to get it, and let them know, how to find you on the social media and how they can, go and read up more about Harold if they're interested. Because I'm sure you've got story after story, but the thing is, they if they really want to find out more information, buy the book, get the book, read.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, don't believe me. Most of my experiences are based on other people's experiences, but you can find the book Harold the Haunted Doll on Amazon. I think it's like $16.95, and it's a good sized book. And you can go on Facebook, and there's like websites, or there's a couple of Facebook sites on Harold the Haunted Doll. I have one called Harold the Haunted Doll and Other Possessed Possessions, and then other ones that's straight Harold the Haunted Doll, and people are still talking about him.
Yeah, go and check it out and look it up yourself and ask questions. And when you go to these sites and these groups, you'll probably be able to contact Anthony directly if you have questions. Anthony, thank you so very much for doing this. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us about this. I've been most curious about it and just terrified to reach out because I was so afraid. But then I figured, you know what? If Harold doesn't want this to happen, it won't happen. And tell Harold thank you that he allowed this to take place finally. And I appreciate him allowing it. And I appreciate you taking the time. And thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, Kalila, it's been fun. It's, again, good to hear from you again. I'm glad you did.
Wonderful always to hear from you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
You're more than welcome. Thank you again.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
And thank you all for joining in again, and check in back with us next week for another episode. Pleasant dreams. Searching for Spirits by Kalila Smith is a concise how-to manual for anyone who enjoys a good ghost hunt. Delve into the realm of spiritual beings that were never human. Explore the world of demons and real vampires. Join in real case studies conducted on investigations that were featured on A&E, Discovery, Travel Channel, and other television broadcasts. This book will answer your questions about ghost hunting. It is a must-have for anyone from the novice to the expert. Completely updated and in its second edition, this is the one book that you need for ghost hunting based on actual first-hand experiences. Searching for Spirits by Kalila Smith, available on Amazon in paperback and download, or at darkoakpress.com. Press.com.